Hello and welcome to this really special show, something that I've enjoyed preparing for a lot. And we're very lucky to have Ram Guha with us. Thank you very much, Ram, for sparing the time. And thank you for writing this absolutely amazing book. It's extremely well researched. You worked hard for once in your life and very scholarly, but most of all, it's most enjoyable to read. And why is it so enjoyable? What makes it unusual is it's a story. It's the mini biographies of 7 people. In fact, the subheading is Western Fighters for India's Freedom. The main title, of course, is Rebels Against the Raj. And you talk about the lives of 7 individuals, 4 British, 1 Irish, and 2 American. And 3 of them are women. And they all came to India and fought for India, for India's independence and for a better India. But they all came from different backgrounds. They had different parts of the world, different parts of the country in Britain. So what exactly united them, do you feel?
So I think what united them was that they were betraying their religion, their race, and their nationality. And I use the word betraying in a positive sense, not in a pejorative sense, because their race, the white race, dominated the world. Their nationality, Britain or American, were the world's greatest superpowers. And Christianity was, an ascendant force over other religious faiths. And yet these 7 people identified with a country, a culture that was discriminated against, that was suffering colonial exploitation, oppression, subjugation. And it's like people of privilege having a conscience and the sensitivity to recognize that their true path lies with those who are underprivileged. In this case, people of a very different nationality and very far away. We are talking about a time when there was no internet, there was no air travel. So for an Irish woman like Annie Besant to imagine coming to India was an extraordinary leap of faith. And that's what united these 7, Prannoy, that they all left a life of privilege, entitlement and comfort to struggle for Indians against the Raj.
I'm so glad you've written this book because a lot of us have heard of these names and know a little bit, but had no idea after reading this. And it is really very, very readable. One got to understand so much about these really great people. And a lot of them your book makes it clear that their lives were intertwined in India with Mahatma Gandhi's.
Yeah, they all had, firstly, they, except for one, all died here. Miraben, one of my rebels, went back to Europe and died there, listening to the love of Beethoven, music of Beethoven, who was her first love. But all stayed for several decades, lived in different parts of India, and all had very interesting, complicated relationships with Mahatma Gandhi. Some were devotees like Miraben, some had a more adversarial, combative relationship. Some wrote books about him, like Philip Spratt, one of my favorite characters in this book, was a British communist who became an Indian free marketeer, and along the way wrote a very insightful book on Gandhi's personality and politics. And Gandhi
he switched from communism to a total free market, right?
But he was fighting for freedom, Prannoy, freedom against the Raj, freedom against the license permit Raj, we might say.
Yes,
and he was following his instincts, and we all change as we grow older, and that's part of his evolution. But Gandhi was the towering figure of the age. So they all had to, so to say, settle their accounts with him. In becoming Indian, they had to understand, relate to, often agree and sometimes disagree with Gandhi. So Gandhi is a running thread through the book.
Yeah, in fact, you do quote, I remember one bit in the book, being a pollster, I just remember it. There was a poll done who were the 10 greatest Indians of that time. And Gandhi was way ahead of the second. I do have to add, in that 10, there were 5 Bengalis, right? Sorry. Okay, what I'd like to do is with you go through each one a short, like a 1-minute story of their lives, and how that gives you a picture of of that time in India, the history. So from the the smaller stories to the bigger picture. Start with anyone you'd like to start with, and something about their life.
So I'll start chronologically with Annie Besant because she comes first. And she
Yes.
comes in 1893, Prannoy, which interestingly is the year Swami Vivekananda makes his great speech in Chicago. And Gandhi, of course, goes to work in South Africa. So when two great Indians are going to make their mark in the West, this Irish woman is making the reverse journey, coming to India, first as a theosophist, interested in spirituality, and then moving into politics very quickly via education. She's one of the founders of the Banaras Hindu University and becomes, because she's Irish, she's inspired by the Irish Home Rule movement of 1915-16 and starts a Home Rule League for her adopted country, India. And, she's brilliant, a fabulous orator, combative, attracts disciples, but also repulses some people, and later is overshadowed by Gandhi in the freedom struggle, which she takes very badly. Like many people who are once successful, and then somebody else comes and steals their thunder, so to say. She took that very badly, being eclipsed, and dies a rather lonely figure in Madras.
So actually, as you write in the book about her, that she was a great orator. She went around England, and became quite well known there. So when she came here, what was the situation, the larger picture in India that she was fighting particularly for?
So I think it was education. So she started schools and colleges. She was one of the founders, arguably the second most important founder of the university. But her appeal, she was a great orator, but her oratory was limited by the fact that she could not speak any Indian language. So the people who flocked to listen to her were English-speaking upper caste male Indians who were lawyers and doctors and professors. And Gandhi's great advantage, the advantage of people like Gandhi and Tilak, who essentially, overshadowed her, was that they spoke in the vernacular. They spoke Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi or Lajpat Rai in Punjabi. And actually, she played a very important role in mobilizing the educated middle classes. But she could not penetrate more deeply in the social structure because essentially, however Indian she could be in spirit and in mentality, her language was still English. And that's of course a very contemporary question today. Are Indians who speak English, truly Indians? I mean, that's something which is often raised today as well. But in catalyzing the Home Rule movement, in encouraging women to enter politics, in 1917, she became the first female to be president of the Indian National Congress, Prannoy, 1917, at a time when there were no women in British or American or French or German politics. In 1917...
That's kind of a very important, as you say, extension from her life to the larger picture about the role of women. She really galvanized that to some extent, right?
But it inspired people. So people who came after her, like Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Sarojini Naidu, thought that women can play a role in public life. They're not just homemakers and mothers. They can reshape society. So I think she was, in that sense, an inspiration.
Move on to the next person. You choose the order you'd like to speak to introduce each one.
I'll go chronologically. So the next person who comes is B.G. Honeyman, an Englishman who's the fearless editor of the Bombay Chronicle, which was a Swadeshi alternative to the establishment-oriented Times of India, writes searing editorials on Jallianwala Bagh, is deported, and somehow finds his way back, breaking the passport rules, settles
deported by the British. Deported by the British because they couldn't stand his writing. Right.
Absolutely. Deported by the British because they couldn't stand an Englishman saying Indians deserve the same rights as English people back home. And he is still remembered in Bombay through the Honeyman Circle, which is a beautiful park in southern Mumbai. Many people don't know who Honeyman is. They may think he's a Parsi, Nariman, Honeyman, and so on. But he was an English editor, greatly revered, also by the working classes. Many of his speeches I talk in my book were given in chawls because he was someone who fought for the rights of workers and peasants. So he was, a kind of a left-wing Democrat who adopted India, and also, and this is the part of the story which is very interesting, though not completely fleshed out because of lack of evidence, he was also gay. So he was also, in some senses, a sexual revolutionary, going against the mores of his time. So he is the next person whom I feature in the book.
But I mean, again, what you write about him, about his writing, his journalism, his editorials, it was revolutionary at the time because you couldn't. Most newspapers were not free to write anything, right? That was the bigger picture. He was really fearless in what he did.
Yeah, and he was fearless in criticizing the Raj, Prannoy, but he was also fearless in criticizing the inequality in Indian society. So the abolition of untouchability was a passion with him. The rights of workers and better treatment for the textile workers of Bombay was something he repeatedly turned to in his writings. He talked about landlords exploiting peasants in Gujarat. So, his love of justice did not merely extend to political freedom, it was also about social freedom. So he was a very admirable character, and he was often, as somebody for current journalists, he was often in court defending himself against all kinds of accusations of libel and blasphemy, because people try and stem, even today, the freedom of expression through litigation. And Honeyman was a pioneer because he braved it all, and as one of his lawyers said, he provided a better defense than we could in court. That was one of his attributes, that he could stand up for himself.
I hope we are not learning the wrong lessons from him over the last 25 years here in India. But anyway, let's move on to your next person. Wrong lessons in suppressing the media. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So your next person
who comes is Samuel Stokes, who was an American missionary, who comes to Himachal, not far from Shimla, the Kodgar Ilaka, leaves the church, marries an Indian girl, goes to jail in the non-cooperation movement, and later plants the first apples in Himachal. So he lays the foundations of what is now a flourishing economy, a multi-million-dollar economy, promotes the education of women, and then late in life converts to Hinduism, because he says to identify truly with the hill people. As a Christian, I'll always be an outsider, and a person of great principle, reflection, and also a wonderful writer. Someone who, all my 7 were writers, which attracted me to them, that they had left behind a corpus of work which I could, rehabilitate.
So in addition to switching to Hinduism, marrying locally, becoming basically Indian at heart, he was constantly fighting against the British Raj, right?
For the first part of his career, because, he fought against also the system of forced labor. In the hills, if a white man was going for shikar, the villagers had to give him milk and eggs and meat for his provisions. They had to carry his supplies, all free. That was part of how the Raj was run. Absolutely feudal system resembling that. And he got it abolished. He started a movement to get it abolished. But he was also a very mystical, spiritual kind of person, seeking bridges between Christianity and Hinduism. Again, someone whose message of interfaith tolerance, that you may subscribe to a particular faith, but that does not mean you hate or have antagonistic relations towards a faith that is not your own. In that sense, he was very Gandhian. In his religious pluralism and tolerance, he was very Gandhian.
Again, a lot to learn today from that. Now, moving on to the fourth person. You see, what I love is that nobody knew that much about his horticultural path, the apple orchards. We knew he fought, but these were lovely things. And also the fact that he had to go to jail, and that his interfaith, respect a person of another faith. Wonderful to know that, and it's so relevant of that time and today. I'm sorry, you were going on to the floor.
Prannoy, to be included in this book, you had to either go to jail or be deported. So I had regretfully to exclude people like C.F. Andrews and Sister Nivedita, who, of course, did a great deal for intercultural relations, but I thought I'd restrict myself to true rebels, thoroughgoing rebels. So the fourth is a person pretty well known, Meera Ben, who was Gandhi's adopted daughter. But I think I tried to shed light on some of the lesser known aspects of her work, particularly her work after Gandhi died in the 1950s, promoting environmental conservation and forest management in the Himalaya, starting an organic farm, criticizing some of Nehru's development policies for being insensitive to the rights of villagers. He was an early critic of the kind of urban industrial bias of India's economic policy and the destructive aspect it had on the social fabric and on the environment. And she also played a role, as I document in my book, a very important role in inspiring and encouraging Attenborough to make his Oscar-winning film. So right till the end, although she went back to Europe, right till the end, she was taking the message of Gandhi as she understood it. She also
I
had a
think
very
then
tragic...
it was so very foresighted to be so involved in the environmental issues at that time, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And some of the people who she worked with later were part of the Chipko movement, as was true of another character in the book, Sarla Ben. So let me talk about Sarla Ben, because she's another English woman who goes to the Himalaya, is arrested in the Quit India movement, spends 2 years in jail, and then after coming out of jail in 1946, starts the first women's school in rural Kumar, an extremely patriarchal backward part of India, Uttarakhand, where women never went to school. And she starts this school, and the graduates of that school become some of the leaders of the Chipko movement. She also is an early environmentalist and writes, very important tracts on the importance of harmonizing nature with, human needs and human greed. And absolutely devoted to this country, dies in Kausani 40 years after she goes there. And while she is running the Lakshmi Ashram, nurtures a cadre of younger social workers who carry on her work. I was in Kausani just before the lockdown, and I was inspired by how her legacy carries on. So it's still there.
Amazing. And remind everybody of her Western name.
Her Western name was Catherine Mary Heilman, and then she became Sarla Devi. Meera Ben was Madeline Slade, and then became Meera Ben.
Okay, let's go on to the 6th and 7th, and I want to ask you a little bit about the broader picture, etc. But these stories are just, so easy to read, and you can read, they're all integrated in their own right, and you can read them one at a time. It's just wonderful. The 6th one you'd like to talk about.
So very quickly, let me do the 6th and 7th together, Prannoy.
Okay.
The 6th,
yes,
I've already mentioned, Philip Spratt, who came as a communist trying to blow up India, was jailed in Meerut in the Meerut conspiracy case. In jail, started reading Gandhi, was cured of his communism. Just before he went to jail, he fell in love with a Tamil girl called Sita, and the love letters between Sita and Spratt are incredibly moving and richly detailed and form the kind of core of the first of my chapters about Spratt. He comes out of jail, becomes a journalist in Bangalore, in my hometown. Not actually, his press was not far from where I live now, and then moves steadily rightwards and becomes an ideologue of the Swatantra Party, and also along the way writes a pioneering study of the Hindu personality. He's one of the first people to use the analytic framework of Freud and Jung to understand Hindu family life. But devoted to India, marries a Tamil girl. They have 4 children. The grandchildren are still working in Bangalore. One child became Inspector General of Police in Haryana. Is known as Philip Mohan Spratt. Herbert Mohan Spratt. So completely indigenized himself, and a fighter for freedom, for political freedom, economic freedom, a wonderfully fluent writer. And as I said, his book on Gandhi and his book Hindu Culture and Personality are still read and referenced by scholars. The last
one thing which you said, which I think we really need, which we had learned from, against the license Raj, right? License permit Raj.
Yeah. So he was an early advocate of entrepreneurship and the free market. And Rajaji, the founder of the Swatantra Party, recognized this attribute in him and persuaded him to shift from Bangalore to Madras, where he worked as an editor of Swarajya, which was Rajaji's magazine at that time. The last person I'll briefly mention was an American, the second American after Stokes, was a man called Dick Ketan, who came as a missionary like Stokes, left the church, again knew Gandhi, was deported during the Quit India movement of 1942-43 because he was working with students in Mysore. And the Maharaja Mysore did not want this independent-minded American hanging out with impressionable young students. So he goes back and comes back again once India becomes independent, and helps start the Gandhigram Rural University, which is one of the pioneering educational efforts in rural education and development. And several of his followers are still active. One of his followers is a remarkable lady called Krishnammal Jagannathan, who's in her 90s, and who got the Padma Bhushan last year, and who recognizes Ketan as the inspiration for her work in rural development. So he is the last person to die. He dies in 1984. Besant comes in 1893. So it's a century of Indian history, Prannoy, told through these 7 extraordinary lives.
And it does say a lot about India at that time that, in fact, Gandhi, you quote Gandhi saying how we should accept these people if they are ready to be with us and mingle with us like sugar mixes with milk, I think you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And we accepted them and you know, looked up to them because of their work.
Yeah, we had, I think that's the part of India, I think, again, is part of our freedom struggle was they were patriotic without being xenophobic. They were proud of what India was or it could be while being open to the rest of the world and what they could learn from the rest of the world. And they were absolutely welcoming of people who became Indians despite their nationality or religion or skin color. And the book is dedicated, I should say, to Jean Drèze, who's continuing.
Yes. So I used to know Jean Drèze was a Delhi School of Economics. A wonderful, wonderful.
And he is a Belgian-born Indian economist, just as Spratt was a British-born Indian journalist, or likewise with Horniman and so on. Exactly. So I think it's an open-minded, pluralistic, Catholic tradition of the Indian national movement that these people were part of.
It was not xenophobic. We were fighting the British, but we were open to the best ideas from everywhere. That's changed in the world today, right? Changed in India and in many other countries.
Absolutely. And, you know, I of course, this book has been in my mind a very long time, from at least for 20 years, and it's only come together now. I'll be getting material in the archives all these years. But I realize now that I'm glad I delayed its writing and publication, because we live in a world riven by xenophobia, paranoia, jingoistic nationalism, not just in our country, but in Turkey, in Russia, in Britain, in the USA, in China. I mean, Xi Jinping's absolute hostility to the outside world, his dogmatic conviction that only China knows best. China will tell you what to do. So I think this kind of narrow-minded, insular, and ultimately destructive xenophobia that is sweeping the world, to that these lives offer a kind of salutary example. They tell you we can be different.
The timing is perfect because we can learn so much from it, which at this time is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I hope the lessons are secondary. It's the caliber and quality and interestingness of these lives that is primary. You know, these are 7 extraordinary stories of people, and the lessons come later. You know, this is not a work of advocacy or polemic or philosophy.
No, but you know, when you read their lives, you get the bigger picture. One last question. If they were all alive today, what would they be doing in India? Would they still be in India? Would they? I think
they would all be in India, because all of them had chances to go back and neither of them took that up.
So they realize that us Indians, we are special.
Well, I think for all of them, India was special. And, you know, as in several of them had romantic relations. One I should mention is Mirabai also was in love with the Indian revolutionary. Unfortunately, she couldn't marry him. But they had deep and abiding friendships with particular Indians, even if it was not romantic or sexual or whatever. You know, I think they rooted themselves here. They most of them learned Indian languages. They grappled with real problems. You know, so it's not like you know, occasionally you have foreigners who come to India and marry at the absolute top of society. You know, some real big industrialist in Bombay might have had a foreign wife, or, you know, and so on. Or a general of the army may have married, you know, an American lady, and they live in bungalows and they live like memsahibs. But, or you know, you have corporate heads of, you know, when you were growing up in Calcutta, you would have had British people smoking a pipe and going to the Bengal club and playing golf and racing and so on. So and in the 60s and 70s, there were many of them. But these 7 Westerners declassed themselves, not only denationalized themselves, but they declassed themselves. I think that's really quite remarkable about each one of them.
And in many ways, degenderized. They were, as you said, so many of them fought for gender equality.
Yeah.
You know, it is just a fabulous book. It's very easy to read. Do not get put off by the size, because there are like 7 different wonderful stories, and it's so important for us to know at this day and age. And I tell you one thing, I think they recognized, and you and I have been around the world, Indian people are the warmest, loveliest, most open people, and we need to value that and hold on to it. So it's great to read this book. Gives us a lot of hope, and you learn a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prannoy. Thanks.